Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. As you can see, the P&O cruise ship is still docked over there at the International Passenger Terminal, and I had a look online and I can see that it will be departing today at about 4 p.m. for a 3-day cruise, which is fully booked out, which is good to hear. So hopefully the cruise industry is going to slowly but surely get back onto its feet, and we can all look forward to attending some cruises over the next few years. It's early Friday morning. We've got a weekend ahead of us. I'm up here on the Cahill Expressway, just in front of Circular Quay, so you may hear the drone and the motion of cars travelling behind me. There's a gentle breeze blowing today, coming in from the west by the looks of it, and it looks like it's going to be a beautiful, clear day. I won't get to see a sunrise or the pinking of the horizon from this vantage point, but what we will be able to observe over the next 20 minutes or so is the to and fro of the beautiful ferries coming and going from Circular Quay, and it is quite mesmerising, and it's just like they're doing a ballet show for us. Anyway, in the tradition of Jim's 5am Club, what I want to do this morning is go through yet another book summary, but today's book summary is going to be a little bit deeper than the ones I normally do, and the reason for that is because it's written by a unique author in the name of Yuval Harari, and the book is entitled Homo Deus. And it's a book which basically looks at our past, looks at our future, and tries to, I guess, bridge where we've come from and where we're going in his typical sort of form. And what we'll do is we'll step through, not the whole book, but just 2 or 3 of the key points that he makes, and try and make some sense and see how it relates to our own lives and how we can leverage what is going on in the world today, and how the world is changing and is morphing into a completely different place to what it was when we were first born into this world, and the world that our parents and grandparents and forefathers experienced over time. So the first point that Yuval Noah Harari makes in this book is that we learn history to help free ourselves from the past and allow ourselves to imagine alternative destinies. And he makes a powerful point to kick off this book summary, where he says something which helps put things into perspective. And he says that the reality of today is much different of the reality that we had in the past. Our forefathers, our ancient forefathers, lived on fear, and that fear was very, very real. Because there was a chance that you could have been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, or you could have been attacked by somebody in the adjacent village who may have stolen your family, stolen your wife, stolen your children, and kill all the men and the elders within the family tribe. Or you could have, realistically, been starving and have to live through a famine or wars, even though war is happening throughout the world and will always happen throughout the world in isolated instances. War was very much a part of ancient civilization and ancient lives. But he says we live in a much different place today, and yet the struggles are still real. They are different to the struggles that others would have experienced in bygone eras. And to put it into perspective, the author here says the reality of today is that we are more likely, listen clearly here, listen closely, today we are more likely to die of suicide than of war. We are more likely to die of obesity than starvation. And we are more likely to die of old age than of poverty and starvation. So all of these elements have become abundantly clear over the past 100 years. And what we need to ask ourselves is, how did we get to the point where you're more likely to die of suicide than of war, than of murder? You're more likely to die at your own hands than the hands of an enemy. So we've become our own enemy to a certain extent. So the author puts all of these things, all of these questions before us and asks the question, what's next? How do we get from where we were to where we are? And where are we heading to from where we are? Given that we have fewer real problems, but a lot more imagined problems. We're running on fear, uncertainty and doubt, which is irrational. Most fears, most of the doubts, most of the challenges that we face are of our own imagination. We have conjured them up. They're a figment of our imagination, and yet they are real because they are perceived and we've made them real. So it's a real challenge, and it's really sad to think that there are people living in the world today who are living in fear, uncertainty and doubt of their own creation, things that they have inherited from the media, from their parents, from their culture, from their uncles, their aunts, their siblings, their parents, their grandparents. Fears that will probably never eventuate. And if they do eventuate, they will never be as bad as what you imagine that they will be. In fact, well over 80%, well over 90%, in fact, the majority of the things that we fear today will never eventuate, and yet they shackle us to a prison where we can't express ourselves, we can't do the things that we enjoy doing, because we are like the elephant, like the circus elephant, chained to a post at a very young age, and then even though the shackles are released, we are still imprisoned in that imaginative thought that the chain is still bolting us to a post in the ground. So the first formal point that comes from this author is the power of stories. The power of stories to empower, and the power of those stories to disempower. So stories can release us and they can imprison us. It all depends on the narrative that you've chosen to follow, that you've chosen to worship, that can have an impact on you. And it's important to understand that as humans, these stories are what make us the strongest animal on the planet. Our ability to use these narratives, to use these stories, to enable us to imagine a better future, But on the opposite side of that, there are people who use stories to limit people's growth, to limit people's opportunity, and to make them the weakest animal on the planet. So weak that there are 3,000 or more people here in Australia every year who live in this promised land, who live in the best country in the world that has welfare systems that provide unbelievable support. There are people today, 3,000 people at least per annum, who end up committing suicide and taking their own lives. It's just bloody mind-boggling to think that there are children, there are people in Africa who are starving and yet are fighting to survive, and yet there are people here in Sydney today who are going to attempt to take their lives for no other reason other than the irrational fears, the mental health issues that they have, which are keeping them from being who they are destined to be. So the author goes on to say that as humans, there are things that we need to celebrate. And the fact that we have democracy, freedom of speech, and all of those other things that come from a civilized world, to know that through democratic elections, that we know that we can cooperate, we know that we can collaborate and work together to make things better for all of us. And the fact that we have communication, and this communication ability is what sets us apart, sets us above and the animal kingdom, and that these stories and this ability to communicate, and through these shared stories and narratives, we can set ourselves apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. But we need to understand that we need to be able to use these and leverage these abilities in a positive way and not in a negative way. So the bottom line, the most important lesson to come from this book is the importance of storytelling, and to learn and to embrace and to want to be storytellers. Encourage your children, encourage your grandchildren, encourage those around you to be storytellers. Be a listener and an encourager, because the best storytellers, i.e. the best communicators, end up becoming the best leaders. So if there's one thing that you should be trying to build in your repertoire of skills, in your inventory of life hacks, is to be the best storyteller you can be. Because through storytelling, you bring people together, you create a better future for yourself and others. But it's important, of course, for those stories that you're telling to be empowering, and not to be one of those storytellers who create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So the best stories, or the stories that tend to win out over time, according to this author, are the ones that ensure our cohesion, our survival, and our ability to live together as a species. So in terms of what stories are the best over time, it's the ones that help us stay together. I guess, from my Christian perspective, the truth of the Christian religion, the truth of Jesus, those are the stories, those are the truths that have endured over 2,000 years and will hopefully endure for the rest of humanity, for the rest of time. And the reason why they endure is that they bring us together. They are stories of love. They are stories of hope. So the author then goes on to say and to warn us that times are changing, and today's dominant stories, dominant narratives are ones of humanism, and that religion, Christianity, and the other religions are under tremendous pressure on a number of fronts. We have the internet, we have social media, which has created a platform for like-minded people to tribe together and to be influenced by a small group of influencers who target their message, their good message, and in many ways their bad messages to many people. And they influence and they affect the behaviour of others. In the past, we had leaders who were the influencers. And these leaders were leaders because they were educated, they had experience, they had vision. Whereas today, a lot of our children, our grandchildren, are being led by populist leaders, people who are popular, who are celebrities, who are well known for no other reason than their ability to create spectacles on social media. They are not the educated. They are not the professors. They are not the people who were top of their class at school. They aren't the people who are the most intelligent, and yet they hold people in their influence. They hypnotise people with their messages. They distract people with what they do, what they say, which is really, really interesting, but really, really dangerous, according to what this author is saying. And they manipulate the truth. They manipulate science. They manipulate rationality. They manipulate technology. And they are the people who, I guess, are self-actualizers. But it's all about the self and not about others. We live in a very selfish society where people are too busy trying to do the things that make them happy or that satisfy them, as opposed to focusing and helping others around them. So as we know and as we see, we have Facebook, we have social media, we have Twitter, which bring people together, which enable people to tribe and to go on tangents. And instead of bringing all people together, it's all about identity politics, trying to achieve something for a small group of people instead of the majority ruling and society trying to achieve what is best for most. What is happening now is we have the tribes just trying to gain as much leverage as possible to get as much as possible for a small group of people, which I guess won't work in the long run. Because we've got campaigns now for certain causes that have become mainstream, but for a minority, not for a majority. We've got climate change, we've got waste, we've got wealth redistribution and other causes which are distracting and diverting resources throughout the world, and may, as we said before, have an impact, a significant impact on how we are. So the author then goes on to finish up and it gets a bit complex here on. And he talks about all of our future narratives involve algorithms. But if we're not careful, these algorithms will replace us altogether. And there are two trends that he talks about. And one is techno-humanism, and the other one is transhumanism and dataism. Transhumanism, what the author talks about here, is when humans merge with technology. And dataism is where we let algorithms become as powerful as they can be on their own, such as artificial intelligence. And no one knows which narrative will win in the end. But one thing for sure and for certain, according to this author, is that things will keep on evolving at an ever-increasing pace. So it's going to get interesting as the years go on, and I guess it's going to get scary as well, as we humans keep on pushing the boundaries of rationality, keep on pushing the boundaries of our human gift, the gift of God. You know, by all means, I'd imagine that God wants us to do the best we can with what we've got. But when you start crossing the boundaries, when you start doing things which are not natural, then you start to question whether or not we've got to the point where, instead of taking creation and God's gift for our enjoyment and our self-betterment, we're taking it and using it as a bridge for making life worse for all of us, for making us selfish. And instead of glorifying God with our heart, mind and soul, and loving one another, we're actually loving ourselves more than anything else, and become very, very selfish and self-indulgent to the point of our ultimate distraction and ultimate destruction. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club. As I alluded to before, it was going to be a tricky one indeed, because this author is quite futuristic in his outlook and quite alarmist in his view. And I guess we need to, balance the idea that as humans, we will try and continue to do the right thing, as opposed to being distracted and led down the path of our selfish desires. Anyway, take care, have a wonderful Friday, wishing everybody a great weekend, and looking forward to one day jumping on one of those cruise ships and sailing out of Sydney Harbour, but probably more importantly, getting on a cruise ship and sailing around the Mediterranean during the summer. Take care everybody, yasas, and bye for now.